Ambassador Hardeep Singh Puri, and Ambassador of Thailand, Gongsak Chutintorn. Before we hand over the mic to Chairperson of the Valedictory session, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, we'd like to invite the Blue Economy heads of delegation 4 or 5 to come on the dais. We'll be felicitated then by our chairman, and we'll take a group photo, and then we start the valedictory sessions. So may I now request from Indonesia, Mr. Roy Siddharth Sembring, can you come on the dais, please? From Laupedia, may I request Mr. Thongpeng Savanafet, if you are here already, if you can come. From Malaysia, Mr. Nur Azman Abdul Rahim, I think he's not here. From Yusai Myothan from Brunei, and from Myanmar, it's not here. May I request also Our Excellency Maria Helen V. de la Vaga, the heads of delegation for Philippines, to come on the dais once again. It's not there. From Singapore, Mr. Jonathan To, please. And from Thailand, Ms. Champunath Champukorn, if you can come also on the dais for 1 second. From Vietnam, His Excellency Ton Sin Tan, if you are here, if you can come. So may I now request Ambassador Mohan Kumar to felicitate them with the patakas. Yeah, just like that.
Okay, like the South Indian fashion. Yes.
And also, I'll request Ambassador Hardeep Singh Puri to join for the group photo with the delegates.
Thank you very much.
Please take a group photo. Also, others, please join for the group photo.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Minister for Urban Affairs and Housing, Ambassador Hardeep Puri, the Ambassador of Thailand in India, whom we fondly call Sam, Sachin, my colleague, Director General of RAS, Secretary to the Ministry of External Affairs, who should be on the desk, but she's here, Mrs. Preeti Saran. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my real privilege, actually, to be participating in this session. It is the last session of what was really an eventful 2 days, and I'm particularly happy and delighted to have with us today Honorable Minister for Urban Affairs and Housing, Ambassador Hardeep Puri. I don't think he needs any introduction, but those of us who have been in the Foreign Service literally grew with him, and I certainly had the proud privilege of being his third secretary when he was first secretary. And one of the first things he did was when he was FS GAT, first secretary GAT, we were so short of people, and I was a probationer, that he was chairing the subsidies committee, and he gave me a piece of paper and said, "Why don't you just read it out?" I read this piece of paper, which actually turned out to be my first intervention in a multilateral forum without understanding too much about what was written there. But that was India spreading itself thin, when we just didn't have enough people just to do what was meant to be done. But from there on, I've had the privilege of knowing him for a long time. But we all know that in the foreign service, there are different kinds of officers, but now and then you have people with a profound strategic understanding of things. And that is something that I now teach, and therefore I find that this can be acquired, but some people are gifted and some people are born with it. I'm really happy that we have for the valedictory session Ambassador Hardeep Puri, who will now give us the valedictory address. But before that, it's my duty also, if he allows me, to just brief him what happened over the last 2 days. He has been busy with the Parliament. We are particularly thankful to him because today, as you know, was an important day. He has actually come from the Parliament to participate here, and he will go right back, I expect. So for just the briefing purposes, I would say, sir, with your permission, I think there was a general understanding that ASEAN-India should be playing a greater role in shaping the architecture in Asia, which is in full flux. So that fact was recognized. The question also was, it was understood that it was performing a little bit below potential and that there remained areas for further improvement. The question, though, was, it was also recognized that India and ASEAN constitute a massive market of 2 billion people, $4 trillion, and so on. So there was recognition that India and ASEAN don't just have to be players in rhetoric. We are capable of shaping events in Asia. So that fact was recognized. The question, of course, then was, what do we do about it? And if I can just brief you on the sessions. We had one session on Northeast, which was participated by the Northeast chief ministers for the first time. And they all had useful things to say. We didn't know, for example, that one of the northeastern states were the largest exporter of pineapples, the fact that there could be golf courses in the Northeast, which could be of interest to ASEAN, our ASEAN friends, the fact that we could have an institute for Southeast Asian studies in Guwahati. So we had specific suggestions which were made in front of the chief ministers. So that's something that RAS will put together, and we will try to see if we can take it forward. There was a session on socio-cultural links, which traced both the history and the current situation with regard to ASEAN-India people-to-people links. And there was a fascinating story from the participant from Philippines, who said that even in Muslim stories, you had the story of the husband leaving the wife and the wife not getting out of the Lakshman Rekha. So there are influences of Ramayana and of Indian culture, even on stories in the Islamic world in Southeast Asia. I personally found it fascinating. On the emerging global order, there was this feeling that if US-China were going to have a relationship which was characterized by high tension, that might give us a little bit of room for maneuver, India and ASEAN, to do whatever we wanted to do. At the same time, there was recognition that if there was a complete breakdown in relations and the multilateral setup took a complete collapse, then that would be a problem for both India and ASEAN. It was recognized that because ASEAN was more integrated with the world, your stakes were probably much higher in the trade war than the case of India. So that was the emerging global order, but it was again recognized that RCEP would be a good thing. On RCEP, we've had conversations. We had Commerce Secretary participate in the RCEP discussions today, and there was a feeling that I think the ASEAN story or the ASEAN perception, if I can be honest, is that India may be going a little slow. But it was also India's perception that something needed to be done on services and investment in order for this RCEP to take off. Otherwise, we will just be talking tariffs. So that was something that we understood as well. And finally, on the maritime cooperation, which was supposed to be the theme for this whole conference, we had a good session this morning, And the outcome basically was that there could be more cooperation, but, and there was generally, I think, an acceptance of the principle of Indo-Pacific, which should remain open, which should remain transparent, and so on. But having done that, obviously ASEAN did not want a confrontation with any power. So, sir, this was basically the theme so far and the discussions we had. We had some parallel sessions on e-commerce and cultural tourism. I will not bother you with that. They were useful as well. But I would leave you with these, giving you a flavor of what happened over the last couple of days. I would certainly conclude by saying there was much food for thought. There was an acceptance of the centrality of India-ASEAN ties and the ability of this relationship, at least the potential, to shape events in Asia, and certainly a recognition that events like the Delhi Dialogue are useful in as much as having an honest discussion of issues that two friends should be discussing. So, sir, with these words, I leave you. First, I think we will request the Thai ambassador perhaps to come and say his piece, after which we will request Honorable Minister to give his valedictory address. Thank you for your attention.
When I received the call to ask me to do this job, I didn't imagine that there would be so many people in the room. And as of last night, I was still trying to convince my Indonesian colleague, who's much more eloquent, to do this job. But anyway, sometimes we have to do what we have to do. This Delhi Dialogue, the 10th one, I think has been great. And if we can do more, then I would like to see the next dialogues and so on go deeper into some of the issues and talk beyond, identifying the issues, the difficulties. One thing that was obvious to me was that ASEAN and India, we can say that Thailand says Thailand and India are maritime neighbors. But then I realized so can many other ASEAN countries say the same. So I suppose we can say that ASEAN and India are land and maritime neighbors. And what was obvious was how deeply the culture binds us, I'm discovering day by day through my tweets and so on, how some words, even the names of the street where my ministry is located, Sri Ayutthaya Road, touches Indian hearts. So culture is much deeper than something that may seem superficial. So ours is therefore a natural partnership. It's beyond words. And so we have a lot that we can build on. Another thing is Sri Ram Madhav, he said that we should consider Northeast region as a hub or center of gravity of the of the Act East policy. That's very true, and the focus is very much there. And I think we have to ask people to be a little patient. Rome wasn't built in a day. I do see prosperity coming to the Northeast region, but I think it will be through border trade. And when the trilateral highway is completed, that's when you will start, today there was an article about how do we preserve Leh Ladakh, Leh, because there's so many tourists. They will write articles about Northeast region as well. I visited the cleanest village and it's in the Northeast. I can't remember the name, but what I remember was that the predominant smell was of diesel because of our transportation, that was clogging up the parking space. But anyway, the time of the Northeast region will come. Thailand's Chulalongkorn University and Nehru University are on the verge of signing cooperation agreements, together to exchange students and so on. It takes time, but be patient. And one of the ideas that came up is that I try to market ASEAN when I'm also marketing Thailand, right? Because Thailand is ASEAN. And so in the Northeast region, maybe we should do some joint marketing, or they should work together as the seven sisters. One person also addressed trust deficit, but I would use that word, use trust and confidence issues. There are many things that we want to do together, but we're not quite sure, RCEP, Trilateral Highway, the Thais are concerned that the Indian transport companies are going to wipe us out. DB Schenker is going to drive from India to Bangkok or whatever, These things have to be talked through, and not at a conference, but that's why when one person suggested that we should have a workshop on the Trilateral Highway, maybe that's a good idea, so that we can air out our issues. So that's some trust and confidence issues that we need to address to take cooperation to the next level. People mentioned rules-based trade and investment, tourism, education, ICT, smart cities, border management and security, and transnational crime. Those are all okay, there's no disagreement on that. Trade war is also an opportunity for India-ASEAN trade, and RCEP is the earliest conclusion with services. We hear India loud and clear. And one of the Thai academics, that is with us today, he even said, why are our trade officials so short-sighted? We're not swimming with people, with IT professionals and so on. But India has plenty. So where are we going to get those from? From India. So, don't take the short-term view. And this probably takes time as well. It comes back to the trust and confidence issues, and maybe some leadership from the top. People also mentioned CLMV as land of opportunity. From day one that I landed here, I mentioned that that is the golden land. And the word for that is, something you can relate to, Suvarna Bhumi. So that is where we should all be headed, So I'm not beheaded, but beheading, okay? Anyway, seamless connectivity is something that we still have to keep working on, because seamless has to be seamless, okay? And land, sea, air, and to develop those into sustainable economic corridors, which means inclusiveness and environmentally sustainable. On Indo-Pacific, I want to mention that there are opportunities for collaboration in infrastructure financing. There are new players in the field, like the US Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, Singapore's Infrastructure Asia, and even in Thailand we managed, let's see how it turns out in the end, but trilateral cooperation between Japan, China, and Thailand to build the railway that links the 3 airports. So moving forward, since I'm here because we're going to be the next ASEAN chair, and we're going to have the honor of coordinating the ASEAN-India relationship, I've stolen some points from the notes of my ASEAN department. What would we like to do? So we would like to utilize the ASEAN-India strategic partnership to build a strategic new equilibrium. You say that there's ASEAN centrality. We are a big part of this region. There are 10 of us, but India is important, and India is emerging, and India knows that. But that's why we have to engage India. We, of course, don't ask me what strategic new equilibrium is, because we're making it up as we go along with the players in the region, which is yet to be defined. We would like to use our good offices to engage ASEAN +2. So ASEAN plus India and China. One thing that we know is that everyone talks to ASEAN. We have the convening power, we don't offend anyone. So maybe we can use that, to good effect. That's one thing the Thais often like to say, we can talk to anyone, we can have exercises with anyone, and so on and so forth. And then I said, but what is your idea? I want to hear what you're thinking as well in your head. And then they seem to sit back and say, oh, it's enough to be able to engage everyone, because we listen, okay? So ASEAN +2 mode, capitalize on historical and cultural links through utilizing the ASEAN-India Center. We want to see that happen. That's important. And we will not waste resources proposing new institutions. This one is good. It's worked well as an ad hoc, but it deserves to be more formalized. Let's work on that together. And yesterday, somebody mentioned the Nalanda University Student Exchange Program. So we want to work with that as well, because that is beautiful and brilliant. And one thing that Thailand is committed to is sustainable development. So we would like to bring in South-South cooperation for sustainable and inclusive development. That's a big part of our foreign policy. And of course, we have New India 2022, we have Thailand 4.0, and other countries have their goals. So we would like to, and India is very strong on digital economy. So digital economy promotion for Industry 4.0 transformation. It's smart to do this, and it would be dumb not to do it. Promoting seamless connectivity in all dimensions, in particular, completion of the trilateral highway. I heard some speakers say that they were there in 2009 when it was announced. We have to do it. We'll do it. It's not the most important form of connectivity, by road. Air, sea, the volumes and the speed are much better, but it captures people's imagination. Prime Minister Modi mentions it. My Prime Minister mentions it. People like to go on road trips. Somebody mentioned that we should take the ministers, on this road trip when it's finished. I took ASEAN foreign ministers from Thailand through Laos to China on Route 3A. And of course, they flew back. So that's one, trilateral highway. We would like to see it completed, probably during our coordinatorship of ASEAN-India. I don't dare say that it will be completed through our chairmanship, but we would also like to announce the extension, the plan for the extension during that period. And of course, ASEAN would like to see India working based on our master plan on ASEAN connectivity. Okay, so we will ask you to participate more in that. Seamless economic space. The Americans have been doing it for a long time in WTO. They want American businessmen to walk into any country and it looks like it's their own. That's what we want as well. We want the economic space of ASEAN and then ASEAN, India, and others to be seamless, starting with completion of RCEP. Maritime cooperation, blue economy, marine resources conservation. Yesterday, the speakers from Indonesia and Thailand spoke about marine debris. It's a big problem. Research and development in marine resources, maritime security. Some of the examples, they might hint at what Thailand's comfort level is, okay? So information sharing on white shipping, tabletop exercises, and working with the ASEAN Center for Military Medicine. So in conclusion, our challenge is to generate a shared understanding of our strategic destiny. We need that first to go on and then we need to build trust and confidence to enable us to realize the full potential of the ASEAN-India strategic partnership. ASEAN needs India, and we hope we have a good partnership in the next years ahead. Thank you.
May I now request the Honorable Minister for Urban Affairs and Housing, Ambassador Hardeep Puri, to please deliver his valedictory address. Sir.
Madam Secretary, Amar, distinguished friends on the dais, Sachin, Ambassador Sam, I should say Your Excellency, Ambassador Chu Tin Ton Gong Sakdi, and my friend Ambassador Mohan Kumar. I deem it a great privilege and honor to be invited to deliver this valedictory address at the 10th Delhi Dialogue. Our relationship with ASEAN is a very special, a sui generis relationship. It is anchored in history, in shared culture, and in partnership based on a shared heritage, a pragmatic appraisal of economic growth and prosperity, and peace and stability. Our relations date back in history. Today, ASEAN is a cornerstone of India's Act East policy. Economic, strategic, and cultural relations between ASEAN and India are deep-rooted. We recently celebrated the commemorative summit on 25th January 2018 in New Delhi to mark the 25th anniversary of the ASEAN-India partnership. I have absolutely no doubt that if the 21st century is to be the Asian century, then India-ASEAN will have to endeavor to make that happen. Ambassador Sam, you mentioned Suvarna Bhumi, and that is where we should all be headed, hyphenated or separated, be headed. Equally, I'm reminded that India is referred to as Punya Bhumi. So when you combine Suvarna Bhumi and Punya Bhumi, then you will have that transformative, paradigmatic shift, which will make it indeed the crowning glory for the 21st century. And I think that is where we should be headed. The Delhi Dialogue has emerged as India's foremost ASEAN-centered Track 1.5 forum. I was very happy, Ambassador, that you characterized the proceedings of this 10th dialogue as great. That is indeed the feedback I've had from all those whom I've interacted with since last night. If I had not been afforded some of the theatrics which I saw from the opposition in Parliament today, I might have spent the whole day here with you as well. Policymakers, eminent academicians, think tanks, and the business community of India and leaders of ASEAN member states have participated in this 10th dialogue to deepen and develop a unique relationship between the two regions. This forum has continued to yield a rich dividend of ideas. I'm told the 2 special plenary sessions, the 6 plenary sessions, and 4 parallel sessions have helped sharpen our understanding, outline the areas where further work needs to be done for convergence in order to take this relationship further. I have always maintained in the 4 decades or so of my experience in what is called, or loosely called, diplomacy, or the professional world related to that, that sometimes we need to interact with our friends in order for the realization to dawn within us, using an external stimulus, that there have been areas where we have been slow. So if you point to issues like connectivity, and you specifically mentioned the trilateral highway, where I think we have been somewhat slow would be perhaps even an understatement. I can tell you that from my days as a young director in the Ministry of External Affairs many, many years ago, to more recently when I was Secretary Economic Relations, and then later when I had the privilege of chairing RIS, I have always maintained that there is something very special about India-ASEAN relations. And I'll come to some of those specific features in a minute as part of my prepared text. But that something special is enhanced in terms of value and quality if we get the connectivity part right. And therefore, the connectivity has to be both maritime and on the land route. So I agree with you entirely. I think you also mentioned the need for a seminar or a special session devoted to issues relating to the trilateral highway. Now, as the Minister in charge of Housing and Urban Affairs, I would be exaggerating my turf if I were to say that I welcome that. But certainly as a member of the Council of Ministers and as a friend of the RIS and the Ministry of External Affairs, I would say that I will do whatever I can in terms of the margin of persuasion I have at my command to try and push in that direction. So you have an assurance from me on that count. Before I go into the specifics of this relationship, let me express the hope that most of our distinguished guests, I hope you had the feeling and I hope you received the message of warmth from the hosts and the abundant goodwill which is amply in evidence to make you feel at home. I have always admired the ease and cooperative spirit with which our friends from ASEAN have engaged us. There was a time when I was a younger officer, we were less outward oriented than we are today. Of course, I don't want to get into a discussion on how outward oriented we are and whether you should make an offer on services or something like that. Those are technical details I shall put aside. But I want to say that it's always a pleasure dealing with the individual member states of ASEAN and with ASEAN as a collective entity. We have rejoiced in your prosperity. We have always wanted to reach out to you and to send you the message that our own economic processes are such that they are inclusive and invite you to become stakeholders in those. But let me start by congratulating the Minister for External Affairs, Srimati Sushma Swaraj, for convening this event. In particular, I would like to thank my friend and collaborator of long-standing Ambassador Mohan Kumar, Chairman RIS, and even more emphatically, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, General of the RIS, and his team for presenting a well-arranged Delhi dialogue, both in terms of ambience and content. Mohan used the word that some of you have grown with me. I can just share with you that many decades ago, from the time that he was a young probationer who read out India's statement in the Subsidies Committee when I was chairing it, must have been 1982. From then, you have grown so fast that I think you outgrew some of us, and therefore I was delighted that you replaced me as chairman of RIS. But I think with your immense grounding in trade policy and with Sachin's industry and enterprise, I think you should take the lead in pushing these connectivity issues in ASEAN and for ASEAN and India to work. And I think RIS has a very important role to play, and I look forward to both of you to make that happen. Our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, is on record to say that India's Act East policy is a reflection of the importance we attach to our strategic partnership with ASEAN. He reaffirmed India's desire to deepen this engagement, and I quote, so that it may scale new heights and constitute a defining partnership of our times. India is the closest maritime neighbor of ASEAN. India shares both a maritime and land boundary with ASEAN. In his keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue on 1st June 2018 at Singapore, he reaffirmed India's key role in maritime security and cooperation, leading to strengthening the Indo-Pacific. He said, and I quote, "Ocean holds the key to our future." Both India's western and eastern coasts have witnessed intense maritime activity over centuries. On the east coast of India, the seafaring kingdoms of the Kalinga, the Cholas, and the Pandyas sailed to distant countries in Southeast Asia and established trade and cultural links. This has provided the base connect to ASEAN, a relationship which has grown stronger over the years. Apart from geographical proximity, historical commonalities, cultural affinities, and commercial interests, India's Act East policy has been and continues to be driven by geostrategic concerns and interests as well. The ASEAN-India region represents a combined population of, I believe, 1.85 billion, which is a quarter of the global population, a GDP of over 3.8 trillion, creating one of the largest economic spaces in the world. This joint economic space provides avenues for expansion and cooperation across a myriad of commonalities in security, economic, and socio-cultural areas across the geographical expanse of the Indo-Pacific. India has a long history as a maritime nation. Our maritime interests are both commercial and strategic. The arc of influence of the Indian Ocean extends well beyond its littoral limits. Our Sagar initiative, security and growth for all in the region, is just not limited to safeguarding our mainland and islands. It defines our efforts to deepen economic and security cooperation in our maritime relationships. Respect for navigation and adherence to international norms, we believe, is essential for peace and economic growth in the larger and intellect marine geography of the Indo-Pacific. The economic partnership between India and ASEAN is in a dynamic phase and deepening by the day. Having said that, I must confess I am one of those who believe that the US $80 billion figure that we have currently embarked on, and which perhaps constitutes the highest figure since we signed an FTA in 2010, I must humbly submit that, coming as I do also from a multilateral trade and international trade background, I think this could, without any difficulty, lend itself to massive acceleration. So that 100 billion figure that we set ourselves for 2020, I think is modest. And let me tell you why. I have a very simple way of looking at these things. We are today a $2.7 trillion economy. Whether we grow at 7.7% as in the last quarter, or to 7.6% according to some statistics I read next year, we are poised to be a $5 trillion economy by 2025. And 50% of our GDP is the external sector. So even with a $2.7 trillion economy, for 50% in the external sector, an $80 billion trade relationship from my personal point of view, and believe me, I deliver this valedictory address in my personal capacity. So it's not intended as, a finger pointing at the trade negotiators on either side. I personally believe, and I've said this on many occasions, that the bilateral trade relationship, utilizing the leverage that you have through instruments in the two countries, would be further enhanced when India and ASEAN participate much more vigorously in plurilateral and multilateral arrangements as well. And I certainly have been on record to state for a long time that participation in RCEP, participation in other arrangements, innovative arrangements, are something that we should look at. And this focus becomes just that much more important when you look at the kind of protectionist sentiment which is engulfing much of our activity. Because that kind of protectionism and inward-looking approach So far, it's only a tariff war, but it can easily escalate into something more ominous. A, should be avoided, and B, the acknowledgement that trade constitutes a very important platform for prosperity should be acknowledged. So therefore, I am going to skip some of what was there in the written text, and maybe the uploaded copy will capture it. But let me come to parts of my own work and how I think it could have a bearing on India and ASEAN. And I deal essentially with things called the processes of urbanization. As India's Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, let me submit to you at the outset that what is perhaps not sufficiently acknowledged is the fact that we are rapidly urbanizing. There used to be a suggestion in the West that India was a reluctant urbanizer. But I think the West very often judges the others in terms of their own experiences. We are a standalone case. 17% of India lived in urban spaces in 1947. But then that was 17% on a population base of 300 or 350 million. As per our latest census, which is a 2011 census, 30% of India lives in urban spaces. And by 2030, when we complete the 2030 agenda, we will have 600 million Indians living in urban spaces. My written notes prepared by an excellent research team tells me that by 2050, 800 million Indians will live in urban spaces, or 50% of our population, which will call urban centers their home. And I'm told by ASEAN too, by 2050, 525 million ASEAN residents will reside in cities. Now, we are at the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution. We were a colony when the first industrial revolution took place between 1750 and 1850, right? We missed out on that. Our GDP in the year 1750, according to a Cambridge economist, Angus Maddison, was about 27% of global GDP. By the time we had the experience, within quotes, of 190 years of colonialism, our contribution to global GDP had come down to 3%. Now, rising from that trough, it is a win-win, because we are confronting two challenges simultaneously. One is the challenge of basic skill upgradation on the basic skill level. But simultaneously, we are looking, as I said, we are at the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution, which is all about using technology for urban services. And here I make my second submission to you, that the government of Prime Minister Modi, through its various flagship programs, the Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrut, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, and the Smart Cities program, is embarked on what I would call the most comprehensive and ambitious program of planned urbanization undertaken anywhere in the world at any point of time. I used to choose my words very carefully earlier, and I say in the democratic world, because I thought the People's Republic of China had, but then I looked at the figures carefully. Theirs is more infrastructure. If you look at processes of planned urbanization, maybe because we have a lot of catching up to do, because in at least 67 of the 70 years that we had after independence, the urban sector was subjected, I think, to criminal neglect, and we are now making up for that. The Swachh Bharat or Cleanliness Mission seeks to embody the ethos of Mahatma Gandhi, who stated that cleanliness was more important than even political freedom. The Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, or affordable housing for all, seeks to give every Indian a pakka home which he or she can call their own by the year 2022. And the title of this would have to be in the lady of the house or co-jointly, which would provide a major fillip to female empowerment. My wife always corrects me. She's not gender empowerment, but female empowerment. So I seek to underline. We have to build 11 million urban homes by 2022. I can tell you that we've already sanctioned 5.1 million. We are sanctioning them at the rate of 300,000 to 500,000 additionally every month. So if we go by the higher figure, instead of 2022, we will have the home sanctioned by middle 2019. Or if we even go by the lower figure of 300,000, that is 3.6 million in a year. We 5.1 plus 3.6, that's already 8.7. We are already close to 9 million. So a program which is to be completed by 2022 would already have been sanctioned by the end of 2019 at the very latest. The Amrut scheme involves 500 cities under the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transformation and 100 smart cities, along with the metro lines across the country and the National Urban Livelihood Mission. And I'm sure that the contours of the Indian cities will, in the coming years, begin to look different. But I just want to make a clarification, because I believe you've had an interaction on smart cities. When we originally embarked on the idea, and I looked at the drafting history, the intention perhaps originally was that we would be looking at 100 new smart city projects, which would involve new 100 greenfield projects. But you know, anyone who's familiar with this will realize that if you already have a large number of cities, you have to start with the brownfield project. So out of the first 100, 90 of them are essentially brownfield projects where integrated command and control centers out of the 10 which have come up. I have very recently been to a greenfield one near Raipur. I've seen the ones in Bhopal, in Indore. I've seen the one in Surat. It is just mind-boggling in terms of modern use of technology and the ease of living and comfort it brings to the citizens. Dignity to the girl child, women's security, rational use of water and electricity, and a host of facilities. But I suggest you look at it, it's much easier to drive the point home. But what I want to underline in this massive urbanization activity, that as far as I'm concerned, it provides economic opportunities for economic entities in our friendly countries. And I know that many of you in the ASEAN world are already in tie-up with some of the cities in the south and elsewhere. And many of the companies that we are dealing with have, in fact, an ASEAN personality, or they are based, some of them there. But I would suggest that you look at the prospects in a much more focused manner. One of the residual streaks of cynicism I had to face when I became a minister was, you know, the Swachhata, but, you know, something outside my house is dirty and so on. Well, I was in Indore for a conference that we organized. It was a conference, a UN conference on reuse, recycle, and reduce. Reduce, reuse, and recycle. So I had my Japanese counterpart with me. And since I speak a little bit of Japanese, I haven't forgotten it entirely. I asked him, what did you do when you arrived last night? So he said, I went around Indore. I said, doing what? He said, looking for some dirt. Now, I've had the privilege of living in some of the cleanest cities in the world, along with Preeti and Mohan in Geneva, in Tokyo. But I can tell you, Indore will give any city in the world a run for its money on the cleanliness index. My favorite city still continues to be New York, but not because of the cleanliness factor. I mean, I don't want to get into a discussion on that. New York has electricity of a different kind. But Swachhata or sanitation or cleanliness is the first step. Then you come into the other steps. The housing for all. A house has a basic paradigmatic and transformational shift. My previous generation, my father and his generation, to escape the ravages of the partition, came across the border and lived in refugee camps to start with. But because they were educated, they found some kind of jobs and then moved into small property, which they did not own till much later. But once you give someone a roof which he or she owns, to which he or she will have the title, it begins a process of transformational economic growth. And then you come into Amrit, the water taps, the sanitary, Then you come into the smart cities. Again, the cynicism I used to have is, all right, Swachhta now has become a Jan Andolan. It's become a people's movement. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, everybody sees that there are houses being sanctioned, 300,000, 500,000 every month, and they're coming up all over the place, and you can see them. But they used to tell me, where are the smart cities? And again, my answer to that is, a smart city project is a huge project. It's very small by the Indian scale, because if we have 4,041 cities and they are growing in number, 100 is a very small percentage out of that. But it has a lighthouse effect. Once you get a smart city, every city will want to be smart. So out of a project, let's say, overall outlay of 211,000 crores, when I became a minister, the total amount, because, you know, it takes time to set up a whole thing. First, you need a project management consultant. We didn't have any smart cities, so most of these PMCs have to come from either the West or your part of the world. Then you have to set up a special purpose vehicles. Each of these steps takes 12 to 15 months. But once you get there, then in August end, the amount of contracting which was done was 8,000 crores. By the time a few weeks ago, it was 30,000 crores. By December, it will be 50,000 crores because, you know, you do the DPRs, you do the contracting. The point I'm making is that I used to tell people, look, you will begin to see the physical manifestations of the smart cities between June and December. And ladies and gentlemen, I was proved right. That cynicism is now stopping. We take the press to the smart city integrated command and control centers. They see for themselves what is happening. Central to all the Prime Minister's urban schemes is the absolute emphasis on behavioral change. And this is true for all the Prime Minister's programs. I mean, the elimination of corruption at the top, I think, is visible. You don't hear of the alphabet of scams that we used to hear earlier, what 2G, coal, 3 something, 4 something. Now that's gone. But you know, you still have to deal with the people who are used to a certain style of behavior, so that behavioral change is something where the value system percolates down. Now, in Surat, I found a very interesting thing. The minute I looked at that huge screen, I said, but you know, there's very fast-moving traffic. All the traffic lights are not there because they're still setting it up. Why are people not wearing helmets? So we summoned the police commissioner. He said, yeah, we're trying, but people are resistant to change. So when I mentioned to the Prime Minister, he had a very interesting thing to say. He said, I know, I set it up, but the problem is that they say, no, why, you don't need a, you know. So I said, there are two possibilities. One is that you compile a list of all the trauma centers where people come in with head injuries on two-wheelers, but that may be a gruesome thing. A nicer thing to do is tell the petrol pump people, don't give any petrol to somebody who comes to you without a helmet. So these things will have to be done. I mean, I'm not sure that, but believe me, India is one of those places, and I've been around for a while. Once something starts, like the beginning that I'm seeing now in electric vehicles and what is happening in terms of urban spaces, it will happen so quickly that we will then have to catch up to make sure that the charging hubs are there, etc. When change comes, it comes. The kind of buildings we are building. You know, anybody who knows anything about buildings realizes that 40 to 45% of the toxicity, carbon footprint comes from urban space, residential or commercial. So you have to make the building neutral, and then you have to make it a positive emitter of energy. In Bengaluru, in the heart of the city, there was a huge slum. We cleared that and built a modern, green, certified building with sewage treatment and all the modern facilities, and 8,000 central government employees will work there. So from absolutely squalid conditions of deprivation to this kind of green technology. So this is going to go on, and I was in New York at the high-level political forum, and I said that 70% of the India of 2030 still needs to be built, 70%. And we have to build one Chicago every year between now and 2030. Of course, the trolls took me on and said some nasty things, but they missed out a line I had put in underneath my statement, which is that Chicago has to be green and resilient. So I thank you very much. All I can say is that I was delighted to get back an opening into a world which I enjoyed for 42 years. So it's good to be back with all of you. The message I want to give you is go for an acceleration of India-ASEAN relationship, go for the connectivity, but most important, please view India as a place where great economic opportunities will present themselves, and I'd be delighted, as would be most of my countrymen, to see ASEAN as central participants in that economic exercise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Minister, for excellent and insightful address. I'm here to propose vote of thanks. At the outset, would definitely like to mention that the 25th anniversary of our partnership with ASEAN could not have been celebrated in the way that we did for 1.5 days, and the credit goes to Secretary East, Madam Preeti Saran, for envisaging, and a big hand to her for visualizing and for implementing and ensuring that everything goes on track. And at this moment, I think we are still on dot in terms of the closing session. And I think, Honorable Minister, I think you are already set for the second perilous intervention that you talked about in his first book. And of course, the book's title talked about politics of chaos. But I think time, sir, has come to focus on urbanization and Eastern experiences. And you very rightly mentioned that we have to learn from each other rather than looking at the West. And that, I think, endogeneity in our approach on urbanization, and as you very often emphasize in development cooperation, I think is extremely important. The cities that you chose in your earlier book of the Arab Spring, you talked about Libya, Syria, Yemen, Russia, Sri Lanka. But I think time has come that we also bring in ASEAN in your next book, and that probably would bring in this partnership that you talked about. The fact that you also served in Japan, I think gives you the heft that is required in terms of bringing this, as Ambassador Sam very rightly mentioned, cooperation at the next level. So when we step it up, what are the challenges that we have and what kind of issues we can learn in? In fact, now we look forward for Thailand's leadership on ASEAN, and you very kindly mentioned the list that Thailand would like to do in terms of moving forward. The ideas would have to go beyond projects, policies, and institutions. We need to bring in that cultural ties, which Honorable External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj talked about yesterday. So I think those cultural ties are extremely important. The Vice Chancellor of Nalanda University also laid out a roadmap in terms of how we move forward. And I'm so glad that you talked about South-South cooperation and sustainable development goals. Honorable Minister, when he was chairman of RIS, got SSC back on our track along with sustainable development goals, and we did several events in India, but also in New York last year at the high-level political forum with Dr. Arvind Pangaria. We launched the voluntary national report of India, and RIS had the opportunity of serving Niti Aayog when we came out with the first VNR for India. It's extremely important that we bring in Northeast, and this dialogue could bring in several representatives from Northeast. Honorable Chief Ministers were there. Some of them joined us over dinner also yesterday. And that session went off quite well in terms of bringing in the necessary connect. That is what Prime Minister has been emphasizing in terms of connecting Northeast with our Act East policy. I'm extremely thankful to the ASEAN delegations here, the ambassadors here, who have served an important role in terms of bringing in. I'm really looking at your table, Madam Excellency and Ambassador Indonesia, for your kind support and guidance in terms of we looking forward. As I said, Madam Preeti Saran gave us the necessary guidance that was required in terms of taking it forward, but our support with the Joint Secretary that we got, Mr. Anurag Bhushan, in terms of everyday challenges we had was extremely important. But I think the two heroes of this great show is my own colleague, Professor Prabir Dey. A big hand to Prabir for all the hard work that he did, along with Colonel Puri, who is now Brigadier Puri. I do not see him here, but thanks to this team from MEA and RIS and AIC, which has served an important role. But overall was our own chairman, Dr. Mohan Kumar, who kept a close tab on every dimension of it every day. And I think the draft speeches, I think they were done way back in June. So that was his preparedness and precision with which RIS team worked with this. The whole administration of RIS, the protocol team of MEA, I would especially like to acknowledge here for the great role that this protocol team has played, Oberoi Hotel, and of course the media has played an extremely important role in getting all of us together. I would also like to here mention some of our guests who could not enjoy with us the cultural evening here in this room and had to be in another room. It's just because of the size of the room and not because of any other design. I very much like to apologize to them, but I hope these video recordings of the event would give you the necessary connect that we wanted. I would also like to thank our longtime partner, IRIA, and I do not know if Ms. Anita Prakash is here, but I would very much like to acknowledge Professor Nishimura-san and IRIA team for their partnership and support, and also getting the Blue Economy Dialogue together. The mission of Vietnam played an extremely important role here in getting the Blue Economy Dialogue up and going. We have identified several areas of cooperation in this dialogue, and that probably would go on. The National Maritime Foundation, AIBC, and ASEAN Secretariat also played an extremely important role to get this large event together. Above all, I'm extremely thankful to all of you for remaining with us throughout this, and I would like to thank the delegations and would wish them all the best when they go back. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Friends, we are also joined not only by our ASEAN colleagues, but today we have also invited an ITEC program that is going on at RIS. It is on trade and sustainability. 26 participants from 18 countries were with us, which were parallel at RIS, and this course was going on for last 2 weeks. I have requested the participants, Honorable Minister has agreed for a group photo with this group. I would like to invite all the ITEC participants who are here from different countries, and this was precisely the issue we discussed right on day one, India-ASEAN partnership in the larger global order. So I would like to request all the ITEC participants to come here. Vaibhav, please bring them all here for a group photo with the Honorable Minister, Chairman, and of course the Ambassador of the Thailand. I would like to request Madam Secretary to join us here in the group photo, please. So you can remain.